There's an uncomfortable truth that almost no one dares to admit. Often, it's not failure that scares us, but confronting what it reveals. Making mistakes, losing, being rejected, all of these hurt, but not as much as looking within and realizing that we carry vulnerabilities we try to hide even from ourselves. Failure, in many cases, is just a backdrop, a curtain that obscures the main scene, the fear of facing one's own shadow. The fear of failure acts like a mask. It's easy to believe that what paralyzes us is the possibility of failure, of being exposed, of missing opportunities. But when we delve deeper, we realize that what truly paralyzes us is the refusal to face our fragility. This refusal disguises itself in common phrases: I can't, it's not the right time, I can't. But if we replace the word I can't with I don't want to deal with my vulnerability, the weight shifts. And it's in this shift that the truth begins to emerge. Carl Jung said that the shadow contains everything we don't want to see within ourselves. This shadow feeds on silence and denial. When we choose not to look at it, we believe we're protecting ourselves, but in reality, we're giving it even more power. The shadow doesn't disappear because we ignore it. On the contrary, it becomes more adept at manipulating our choices, until failure on the outside is nothing more than a reflection of what we haven't resolved within. Imagine how many times you failed to act not because there was a lack of opportunity, but because you feared being seen in your fragility. How many times have you backed away from a chance, not because of a lack of ability, but because of the feeling that if you tried and failed, you would need to face yourself more honestly? Failure is just the scenery, the real play takes place within the soul. And yet, this very vulnerability we try so hard to hide is the key to transformation. There is no victory without recognizing our point of weakness. There is no ascension without crossing the dark territory of doubt and insecurity. The mask of failure falls when we understand that it is not an enemy to be defeated, but a mirror to be interpreted. Every time we say I can't, we are saying I don't want to face this part of myself. But if we have the courage to translate our own excuses, we will see that failure was never the barrier. It was merely a portal to reveal the most delicate, and therefore most powerful, part of who we are. If this message has resonated with you so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll strengthen this space and help this reflection reach even more people. Let's move on. There's a silent pattern that governs our lives without us even realizing it. We wake up, repeat routines, and follow thoughts that seem new but are actually echoes of yesterday. Neuroscience reveals that about 95% of what we think today was already thought the day before. It's as if our minds are programmed to always follow the same path, even if that path leads to dead ends. This repetition creates a state of anesthesia. We live, but we don't awaken. This automatic state disguises itself as normality. It seems natural to feel the same anxieties, repeat the same internal dialogues, react to the same situations in the same way. And, for a time, this repetition may even feel safe. But, silently, it becomes a prison. The mind associates familiarity with protection and confuses repetition with stability. But what is familiar isn't always what heals us. Often, what is familiar is precisely what destroys us. Imagine someone walking through a familiar maze. As suffocating as it may be, there's a strange sense of security in already knowing where the curves and the walls lie. The new, even if promising, seems too dangerous. This is how the mind works. It prefers to repeat the same pains rather than risk a step into the unknown. The result is an invisible cycle of self-sabotage. The person believes they are living, when in fact, they are merely repeating. Carl Jung said that until the unconscious is brought to consciousness, it will direct our lives, and we will call it destiny. Living automatically is proof of this. We call it bad luck, misfortune, failure, what is, in fact, an internal programming that keeps us on circular paths. We fail to realize that the barriers we face externally are actually the reflection of a pattern repeating itself within. This repetition creates a silent and devastating effect. The longer we remain in it, the more we believe there is no alternative. The mind becomes complacent, the body becomes ill, and the soul begins to cry out for change. But this cry is often muffled by the false sense of security that routine offers. It's a cruel paradox. We become trapped in precisely that which gives us the illusion of protection. Living on autopilot is living without realizing we're alive. It's allowing ourselves to be weighed down by thoughts we didn't choose, by patterns we don't question, by pains that could have already been healed. The invisible error isn't failing outwardly, but refusing to awaken within. It's continuing to repeat ourselves, believing this repetition is destiny, when, in fact, it's merely an unconscious habit. There is a silent force that imprisons us more than any visible failure, the need to control the future. This urge to predict, to anticipate, to hold in our hands what doesn't yet exist, creates an invisible prison that drains creative energy. It's like trying to hold a river still with your hands, believing that this will give you greater security, when, in fact, what happens is the suffocation of the flow itself. Anxiety presents itself as an internal watchman. It watches every step, calculates every possibility, and in an attempt to protect us, it robs us of the present. It is in this space that life ceases to be lived and becomes managed, as if it were a spreadsheet of risks and outcomes. But life doesn't respond to spreadsheets. It responds to presence, to movement, to surrender. Excessive control doesn't empower us, it only paralyzes us. Carl Jung said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it destiny. When we try to control everything, what we are really doing is running away from this encounter with the unconscious. The attempt to master what's outside is actually a reflection of the difficulty in dealing with what's inside. It's not the future that terrifies us, it's the vulnerability that arises when we recognize that we have no power over everything. There's a simple technique that reminds us of this: breathing in 4 beats. Inhale, hold, exhale, pause. This cycle doesn't change the world outside, but it does change the way the body relates to uncertainty. It's a physical reminder that we don't need to master each moment, just move through it. Control gives way to trust when we learn to be in the present without suffocating it with demands. The vibrational prison of control isn't made of visible bars, but of repeated thoughts that say, if I don't anticipate, something bad will happen. And the more we believe this, the more we vibrate at the frequency of anxiety, pushing away the clarity, intuition, and spontaneity that could guide us. It's a prison that holds us captive, but also a key to awakening. Because the moment we recognize that we don't have control over everything, but can choose our stance in the face of uncertainty, is the moment our soul breathes. Deep down, what we seek is not control, but security. And true security isn't born from the illusion of predicting tomorrow, but from the courage to be fully present today. We often believe our battles take place outside of us: work, relationships, life's unexpected challenges. But the deepest struggle takes place silently, within our minds and hearts. It is in the invisible reflection of the inner mirror that we see not the world, but the way we relate to it. This mirror doesn't show reality as it is. It shows reality as we believe it to be. When we look at this reflection, we don't just see facts. We see stories we tell ourselves. Stories of failure, of inadequacy, of fear. Each narrative constructed over the years becomes a lens. And this lens colors every experience, every gesture, every glance. The inner mirror is, in fact, a stage where we repeat roles that often no longer belong to us, but that we still carry as if they were our identity. Marie-Louise von Franz said that a large part of the inner journey is not destroying what we are, but integrating what we hide. This is the invitation the mirror extends to us, not to fight against the reflected image, but to approach it gently. Not denying the shadow, but allowing it to be part of the picture. Because it is in the integration of what we avoid that we discover a new, more real, and more stable strength. The problem is that we've learned to believe that looking within is dangerous. And so we spend our lives running from silence, seeking distractions that distance us from this encounter. But every time we avoid looking, we distance ourselves. And the more we run away, the more this reflection gains power, to the point where we believe we are only it. The inner mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't shout either. It whispers. It shows us what we need to see, even when we don't want to. Recognizing our own shadow doesn't weaken us, it humanizes us. It is in this process of embracing the light and darkness within us that a new freedom is born, the freedom to no longer need to hide from ourselves. In the end, the mirror is not an enemy. It is a silent, patient teacher, waiting for the moment when we have the courage to see ourselves fully. And when we finally hold that gaze, we discover that life does not ask of us perfection, but wholeness. There's a kind of weight that doesn't appear on our shoulders, but weighs down our soul. It's not the body that feels it, but the shortening of our breath, the tightening of our heart, the slowing of our thoughts. This invisible weight arises from the expectations we carry, often without realizing it. Expectations to always be strong, always sufficient, always in control. It's like a backpack full of stones we never question why we accept carrying. This burden is not only made up of what others demand of us, but of what we demand of ourselves. We grow up believing that failure is synonymous with weakness, that resting is laziness, that asking for help is a sign of inability. Thus, little by little, we suffocate ourselves within unattainable standards. The invisible weight isn't made up of a single stone, but of small demands accumulated over years, and that's precisely why it's so difficult to perceive. Joseph Campbell reminds us that every hero carries a burden on their journey. But the hero isn't defined by the weight they carry, but by how they learn to walk with it. What destroys us is not the weight itself, but the illusion that we must bear it alone, silently, without pause, and without fail. This belief transforms life into an internal exile, as if we were always on the verge of losing it. The invisible weight distances us from ourselves. It makes us believe that life is merely resistance, when in fact it should also be surrender. It makes us forget that the body craves rest, the mind craves space, the heart craves care. The more we believe we need to prove our strength, the further we move from the truth. True strength lies not in bearing everything, but in knowing when to let go. When we recognize the invisible weight, we begin to realize that not all the burdens are ours. Many were handed down by others, inherited from past generations, imposed by social standards or expectations we never truly chose. And perhaps the first step is not to get rid of them all, but simply to choose which ones still make sense to carry. In the silence of this choice, a different lightness is born. It is not the absence of weight, but the presence of awareness. And this awareness reminds us that life wasn't meant to be a burden, but a journey. And that there's no shame in putting a few stones on the ground to keep moving forward. Falling is not what we imagine. We often interpret it as defeat, as a sign of incapacity, as proof that we are not enough. But if we look closely, we will see that falling is part of the journey, that each descent carries within it seeds of learning that the ascent could never offer. Life, in its wisdom, does not spare us from falling, because it is in falling that we discover parts of ourselves that were hidden, forgotten, or denied. Joseph Campbell speaks to us of the hero's journey, and there, the descent into the belly of the whale is not a failure, it is a crossing. It is the passage through the darkness necessary to emerge with a broader vision, with a strength that was previously absent. The hero does not choose falling, but learns to navigate it, and it is on this path that they discover talents, courage, and clarity that would never emerge on level ground. The more we resist the inner plunge, the longer we prolong the suffering. We pretend we are invincible, that pain is a mistake to be avoided, and thus we distance ourselves. Falling is not the enemy, but the mirror that reveals the truth, that there is something within that needs to be seen, acknowledged, and integrated. The pain of falling is intense because it forces us to face what we usually avoid. It is an invitation to recognize our own vulnerability, to acknowledge that we don't always control events, but we can choose our stance toward them. It is in this space of encounter with what is difficult that true transformation occurs. And when we accept that falling is an inevitable part of the journey, we stop fearing it. We begin to see each obstacle as a silent portal, each challenge as a discreet teacher, and each apparent failure as an opportunity to discover an inner strength we previously didn't know. Falling, finally, ceases to be a defeat and becomes a path. There is a silent trap that corrodes the spirit, comparing our own journey to that of others. When we do this, we stop living our own life and begin to measure each step by someone else's pace. Each victory of others becomes a source of anxiety, each advancement of others a reminder of what we believe is lacking in ourselves. And, without realizing it, we vibrate at the frequency of lack, of insufficiency, of constant comparison that prevents us from recognizing the unique value of our own path. Nature offers us a clear lesson: each tree grows in its own time, each river flows in its own bed, each season fulfills its function at its own precise rhythm. Nothing is rushed, nothing is delayed, everything occurs in its natural time. But when we compare ourselves, we forget this principle. We try to accelerate our own evolution, we force results, we seek external validation, and we forget that life reveals itself to the measure of our authenticity, not to the measure of what others achieve. The energetic distortion of comparison leaves us unbalanced. We see abundance in others and believe ourselves to be empty. We observe other people's success and feel like failure. It's a deceiving mirror, because it doesn't reflect who we truly are, only what we judge ourselves to be. The mind confuses external evidence with internal value, and so we lose sight of the most essential point, our own journey, with its timing, its pauses, and its lessons learned. When we stop measuring our steps by others' pace, we open space to reconnect with our own frequency. We discover that we don't need to compete or prove anything. Life isn't a test of comparison, but a silent dance of experiences, where every gesture, every decision, every failure, contributes to the harmony of a greater whole. Recognizing the error of comparing journeys is, therefore, an invitation to reconcile with our own time, with our own rhythm. It's realizing that true abundance isn't outside, but within. And that each step, however small or imperfect, has the exact value that your own story demands. The body often speaks before the mind realizes. It sends silent signals that reveal patterns that distance us from ourselves, but we rarely listen. Unexplained fatigue, pain that arises without apparent cause, small distractions that keep us from important commitments, all these are subtle indicators that something within is misaligned. It's as if the soul is whispering, and we insist on covering our ears with justifications. Convenient forgetfulness is one of them. The mind creates gaps, loses objects, forgets tasks, diverts attention. But it's not just carelessness, it's a silent protective mechanism, a way of avoiding facing what intimidates us or demands courage. Every postponement, every distraction, is a reminder that there are parts of us that resist being touched, that fear the depth of the encounter with ourselves. When we notice these subtleties, the opportunity arises to investigate without judgment. To ask ourselves, what am I afraid I'll find if I really do this? It opens a door to consciousness. It is in this space that patterns begin to be understood, not as failures, but as messages from the psyche itself trying to get attention. Self-sabotage is not an act of malice, but an unconscious dance between fear and desire. A desire to grow, a fear of exposing oneself. A desire to move forward, a fear of discovering who one truly is. Every sign, no matter how small, carries vital information. It is an invitation to slow down and notice what needs attention before misalignment becomes deeper suffering. When we learn to listen to these silent messages, life ceases to be a cycle of repeated frustrations. We come to understand that each sign is an opportunity to reconnect with ourselves, a chance to break old patterns and initiate more conscious choices. Attention to subtle signs is, therefore, a discreet gateway to the transformation that has always been available, but which only reveals itself when we choose to look within. There is a kind of presence that doesn't announce itself, that doesn't require words or movement. It is silence. Jung said that the encounter with one's soul requires silence. And, although it may seem counterintuitive, it is not incessant action that transforms, but the conscious pause that reveals. It is in this space that we can hear what is normally lost in the noise of the world and the whirlwind of thoughts. Silence is not emptiness. It is density, it is body, it is heightened perception. When we allow ourselves to remain in absolute silence for a few minutes, the mind slows, the heart calms, and a clarity emerges, as if a veil were being lifted. In silence, we feel more precisely what bothers us, what blocks our energy, what demands attention. It is as if life speaks to us on a different frequency, and we can only hear it when we stop rushing. It is common to think that more action generates more results, that we need to react to every stimulus, that speed is synonymous with progress. But silence teaches us the opposite, that attentive presence is worth more than rushing, that observing before acting protects us from repetitive patterns and impulsive choices, and that true strength comes not from incessant movement, but from the awareness of each step. Allowing yourself to pause is a practice of courage. In silence, we face thoughts we avoid, fears we hide, and emotions we repress. It is there, in this quiet space, that we find intimacy with ourselves. It is there that the unconscious approaches in a more accessible way, bringing signs and answers that do not emerge in the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Silence as healing is not just the absence of sound, but total self-presence. It is the encounter with one's own soul, the recognition that life requires not only doing, but also being, observing, and perceiving. It is in this state that we begin to dissolve invisible blockages, understand old patterns, and open space for energy to flow more freely and coherently. There's a disconnect that few perceive, but which dictates much of the human experience, the difference between what we desire and what we feel is truth. We want to move forward, create, manifest dreams, but our emotions often vibrate on a different frequency. It's like trying to tune a radio station with the wrong dial. The signal arrives distorted, the sounds are lost, and the music that should guide us becomes noise. This incongruence between intention and emotion creates a field of silent tension. Our body feels, but the mind ignores it. Our energy vibrates in contradictory patterns, and life responds not to what we verbalize or visualize, but to what we truly carry within. Desire without emotional attunement is like planting seeds in improper soil. The potential exists, but growth is blocked. Jung reminds us that the unconscious doesn't negotiate with superficial desires. It responds to the coherence of feeling, the congruence between thought, emotion, and action. When there's misalignment, we experience frustration, anxiety, and inexplicable fatigue. The universe doesn't deny manifestation, it simply returns to us a reflection of our internal state. The process of reconnecting intention and emotion involves sensitivity, awareness of one's own body, and the practice of living as if we were already experiencing the desired outcome, but feeling it in our bodies, not just in our minds. It's a form of deep communication with the unconscious, a bridge between the energy we carry and the life we wish to create. Emotional incongruence is not a moral error or a character flaw. It's a sign that parts of ourselves are not yet integrated, that there are shadow areas that need to be acknowledged. By aligning intention and emotion, we open space for the flow of life to become more harmonious, more coherent, and freer. And it is in this alignment that manifestation ceases to be an effort and becomes a natural expression of being. Some lives are transformed when adversity presents itself not as an obstacle, but as a gateway. There are stories of people who, after losing jobs, suffering setbacks, or going through profound crises, discovered talents that had always existed but had been overlooked. External failure, which initially seemed devastating, revealed itself as the catalyst for an internal transformation, breaking down walls that impeded the flow of one's own energy and authentic expression. The emptiness that arises after a fall creates a silent space, a mandatory pause that forces us to listen to our inner voice. It is in this bare terrain that we find the courage to explore untraveled paths, to recognize hidden abilities, forgotten passions, and to rebuild our lives from a deeper, truer foundation. Every failure, when viewed from this perspective, is less a defeat and more an invitation to step into one's own shadow. Carl Jung reminds us that what we ignore within ourselves directs our lives. This is precisely what happens when failure confronts us. It pushes us, unexpectedly, to encounter what we have avoided seeing. And by accepting this encounter, by crossing the inner portal, we discover not only new possibilities, but also a strength that previously seemed inaccessible. The process is neither quick nor simple. It requires quiet courage, patience with one's own vulnerability, and the willingness to remain in the face of the unknown. But, paradoxically, it is precisely in this journey that freedom is found. Life, by testing us, shows us that failure has no power over those willing to look within and recognize their own light and shadow. And thus, failure ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a teacher, a silent guide, and a gateway to that which has always existed within us. What seemed like a painful end reveals itself to be a beginning, the beginning of self-knowledge, of integration, and of the true expression of who we are, without masks, without illusions, without haste. The greatest barrier has never been failure. It has always been within us, hidden in the shadows, in the corners we avoid visiting. Jung said that he who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. It is in this deep, patient, internal gaze that we find the most essential truth, that the walls that prevent us from flowing are not in the world, but within ourselves. Robert A. Johnson adds, "He who avoids encountering his darkness also loses the chance to touch his true light." Every resistance, every fear, every escape from silence is an attempt to avoid the mirror that reflects our own complexity. And it is precisely in this reflection that the rarest opportunity reveals itself, to cross one's own shadow and discover the essence that has always been hidden, waiting to be recognized. Failure, when understood this way, ceases to be an enemy. It is merely a portal, a sign, an invitation to break down the internal walls that imprison us. True failure is not falling, but never allowing yourself to step into the mirror, never allowing yourself to see yourself fully, without masks, without justifications, without escapes. It is in this encounter, however painful, that lies the possibility of a fuller, more conscious life, more aligned with who we truly are. There is no rush, no judgment, only the need for attention and presence. By accepting our own reflection, with its lights and shadows, we begin to realize that the barrier that seemed insurmountable was always an illusion created by the fear of facing our own depths. And when we cross this barrier, we discover that the flow of life does not depend on the absence of failure, but on the courage to look within and recognize ourselves, whole and authentic. Throughout this journey, we realized that failure was never the true enemy. It is merely a reflection, a sign that something within us needs to be seen, understood, and integrated. Every fall, every mistake, every feeling of inadequacy carries within it an opportunity for growth, a silent invitation to cross our own shadow and discover strengths that were previously hidden. The path of consciousness requires courage, patience, and attention. Jung reminds us that looking within is awakening, and there is no true transformation without this intimate encounter with our own soul. Robert A. Johnson reinforces that light only manifests when we confront the darkness we try to avoid. There are no shortcuts or magical promises, there is only a conscious journey, step by step, moment by moment, respecting our own rhythm and vulnerability. True awakening happens when we recognize that life is not measured by what we achieve externally, but by the depth with which we allow ourselves to encounter, understand, and integrate ourselves. Failure ceases to be a punishment and becomes a teacher. Pain becomes a mirror. And what seemed like an end reveals itself to be a beginning, the start of a fuller, more authentic life, aligned with who we truly are. May this inward gaze remain, even after the video ends. May each breath be a reminder that the greatest barrier, the one that seemed insurmountable, can be overcome. And that stepping through the mirror is not just about facing the shadow, but discovering one's own light. Life doesn't demand perfection, it demands presence. And it is in this presence, silent and profound, that true freedom resides. If this journey resonated with you, please support this work by liking and subscribing to the channel. This way, you'll help keep this exchange alive and allow more people to access these reflections. Until next time.